Alright everybody, you've been asking for a Terry Goodkind author deep dive for a while. I'm not gonna give you that because I really don't want to dive into this guy's life on that deep a level, but I'll meet you halfway. I'm gonna make a video where I basically break down why the fantasy genre and most fantasy fans seem to have an intense hatred for Terry Goodkind and what he has done for the fantasy genre. I'm going to try to recite the events and the quotes from Terry as objectively as possible, and then give my opinions on what he is saying, just, to try and have an attempt at this being completely objective, though it won't be because I really do not like this guy. And then from here on out, just know I will never be reviewing another Terry Goodkind book because I do not want to promote him or increase his spotlight in any way, shape, or form, which even a negative review can do. Not that I'm saying every book he's put out would inherently get a negative review. I would try to review him fair, but after reading one of his books, I highly doubt he will ever match my taste. Now, before I jump into Terry's ego, I want to address his writing, which is probably going to be the smallest focus of this video, because it's not Terry Goodkind's writing per se that makes me really dislike him. He's bad, in my opinion. I'm not going to say I think he's a good writer, but he is by no means a bad person for writing what he writes. But what he does write is incredibly, remarkably derivative books from other fantasy authors, and then just injects his politics at just an incredibly base level. I have only read one book of his, but I've also read many excerpts from other books and done some skim reading to just kind of do basic research for what people have been telling me for a long time. And after doing this basic level of research, I can say with almost 100% certainty that it is as bad as most people online will say. He takes the very wide, broad themes from Ayn Rand writing and then just slathers his own writing in it. I don't particularly agree with many things Ayn Rand says, but if I was an Ayn Rand fan, I would not want her writings represented in this way, because in my opinion, this kind of overly preachy, annoying approach to politics is certainly not going to sway anybody. I actually do like some politics in writing. I like when an author is willing to take a stance, whether I agree with it or not. But to have your character stop and just give these highly politically motivated monologues is obnoxious. So yeah, I don't like the way he writes. I find him to just rely on MacGuffins, plot armor, and convenience more than any other author I've come across, and I've read Harry Potter. No hate to Harry Potter, but that series is full of that. To the point where in the one book I did read, a guy just became friends with the dragon and got a dragon to help him within the span of about 5 pages. Because Terry needed a dragon. So if you want to know more of my thoughts on Terry Goodkind's writing, link to the Terry Goodkind review I have done at the end of this video, where I do a much deeper dive into my problems with the Sword of Truth. More specifically, Wizard's First Rule, the book I read for that review. And now let's transition into Terry Goodkind's ego. And before we go any further, I know people are going to comment that this video feels like a personal attack. I don't mean it to be. I want this to be an objective look at why I do not want to talk about this man in the future, because people still recommend Terry Goodkind books to me. I still get asked to do more reviews. I don't even want to do bad reviews. I do not want to lend my voice to giving him any more of a spotlight, period. I'm sure if I did a bunch more of Sword of Truth, meme-filled reviews, they'd do really well. My Wizard's First Rule review is one of my most viewed reviews on this channel. It would be profitable for me to dive deeper into Sword of Truth. I'm not going to. No. I want to talk about authors I want to promote, I want to talk about authors I like, and Terry Goodkind is neither of those. So let's now transition into Terry Goodkind's ego, which again is something I guess I could look past and forgive, but it's certainly worth note and mentioning here. And I'm going to be pulling from 2 separate instances that are amazing examples of how he views himself. One is a 2003 interview, and another is a Reddit AMA he did. Sorry, it's not an interview, it was a panel he was on, and it's kind of become infamous online for his responses and answers, but let's just dive on into it. And I actually have previously covered this in a World Hoppers video. Shout out to World Hoppers and Elliot Brooks for doing that video with me, but I want more people to be aware of this, and if anyone in my comment section in the future is mentioning Terry Goodkind. My dear audience, please just link them this video so I don't have to address it. I'm going to start with not the worst example. Let's just jump into this one. A fan in the panel asked him, "How many books will there be in the Sword of Truth series?" Terry Goodkind responds, "The answer to that is there will be one less than too many. Right now, I have 2 more books under contract. As readers, no, each of my books is a complete novel, but the series has an overriding background story arc. When the series concludes, the background story arc will be concluded." Okay, one less than too many. You have confidence in your ability to end the series at the right time. All right, but let's let the trend emerge. In your opinion, who is the most must-read cutting-edge writer publishing today? His response, Ayn Rand. Ayn Rand had been dead for over 20 years. He really just wanted to mention Ayn Rand. And you'll notice Terry Goodkind will never, ever promote or shout out another fantasy writer. He will only talk down about them. From another fan, what do you think distinguishes your books from all the other fantasy books out there, and why should readers choose to read your series? Terry responds, "There are several things. First of all, I don't write fantasy. I write stories that have important human themes. Like most other good fantasy, Terry, they have elements of romance, history, adventure, mystery, and philosophy. Most fantasy is one-dimensional. It's either about magic or world building. I don't do either." So Terry, almost all other fantasy has those things you just listed. In fact, the most popular series have all of those because they're a necessity for the genre. They're staples of the genre. Mystery, romance, pulling from real-world examples, those are all real things. But then you just mentioned that you don't have magic systems or world building, and I agree. I don't think you have the energy or capacity to write your own world or magic system. That's why you steal from other authors. In most books, fantasy magic is a mystical element. In my books, fantasy is a metaphysical reality that behaves according to its own laws of identity. That doesn't really make sense and is a whole lot of nothing. It's what I would call a fluff answer to make yourself look good, and again, your magic systems, in my experience, do nothing but move the plot along because you're stuck. Because most fantasy is about world building and magic, a lot of it is plotless and has no story. My primary interest is in telling stories that are fun to read and make people think. That puts my books in a genre all on their own. No, it puts them where almost every other writer is at, almost every other good writer anyway. So I guess readers who are interested in a story rather than world building and details of magic would have a good time reading my books. Terry, never mind. Now, this is also an example of when Terry insists on talking down to people, something that is another theme if you read multiple interviews from him. I'm not going to pull a ton of examples. There'll be one more big one down the road in this video, but a fan simply asks him, "I've noticed similarities between your Sword of Truth series and Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time series. I've often voiced my suspicion that these 2 series might be occurring in the same world. How crazy am I?" It's a kind of strange question, but a legitimately valid one because Terry, if you look online what people say, and just obviously based off of Wizard's first rule, he steals from Wheel of Time a lot. There are whole cultures and societies that are just lifted from the Wheel of Time. I think I should add "in my opinion" so I don't get sued for this. In my opinion for everything I say here. But this is Terry Goodkind's response. "If you noticed a similarity, then you probably aren't old enough to read my books." If you noticed a similarity, then you're probably not old enough to read my books. Terry, T-Dog, noticing something that is there does not mean you're not old enough to read the book, man. And if there was a kid asking this question, there's a lot of weird BDSM sexual stuff in your writing, so I would have been way more concerned about that. Another question was, what made you choose to leave out other common races, dwarves, elves, etc., from your books? Terry's response, please refer to my previous answer in which I explained that I am not writing fantasy. My purpose is not weirdo cultural diversity. I repeat, I am writing stories about important human beings. No, you're not. You're writing stories about very shallow characters who regurgitate your political philosophy after having incredibly cliche stolen storylines. But again, this insinuation and just vibe of I'm better than fantasy is truly repulsive to me. It shows a lack of understanding of genre in general, because genre is not something that restricts you. It's just a label publishers put on certain stories, and you can write whatever you want. No one's putting a gun to fantasy authors' heads and making them write certain things. There are examples of countless fantasy stories that bleed across genre, and those authors happily and proudly say they're fantasy authors. Because that's what that is, man. If you have romance in your story, it doesn't somehow make you not fantasy. It just means you're a fantasy series with romance. What authors do you read yourself? I think the most important author to read is Ayn Rand. Of course you do. Most of my reading is researching for things I'm writing about now. But if I have any time to read, one of the people I like is Dean Koontz. I like his sense of life. Okay, he likes Dean Koontz. Dean Koontz is fine. That's cool. You can like Dean Koontz. That's cool. I like Dean Koontz. He's all right. But then he twists this question and adds a little bit at the end that I find so weird. There's actually very little to read today because more and more books center around characters who are either unremarkable, pathetic, or reprehensible. I don't like authors who choose to tell stories about these kinds of people. I like stories about individuals who can show the nobility of mankind. So this is actually a recent development, and I could, and I think I have, make a whole video about how modern protagonists are much more flawed, much more relatable, and much more human than they used to be. We're seeing a lot more characters who are morally gray, they have questionable motives, because that is the real world. They're deeper, they're nuanced. Terry is clearly wanting a return to the Doc Savage type protagonist. The everyman, the perfect man, the guy who solves everything and is just always right and on top. That's fine, it's a preference, but it's the tone of condescension that drives me wild, because, in my opinion, these more nuanced, flawed, deeper characters are way more interesting, difficult to write, and notable. I'm going to end this by pulling from his Reddit AMA, and this is already going longer than I want, so I'm just going to pull one example, even though there were a couple in there I wanted to examine. But when asked what his favorite book was, Terry Goodkind responded, "Right now, The First Confessor, a book he wrote. But the first book, for me, Wizard's First Rule, will always be my favorite." So he responded two of his own books. Okay. And when someone followed up with the probably unneeded follow-up, "Your favorite book from another author?" Terry Goodkind responded, "Ayn Rand's Anthem." Because of course he did. One last quote, Terry talking about himself and his own influence. "What I have done with my work has irrevocably changed the face of fantasy. In doing so, I have raised the standards. I have not only injected thought into a tired, empty genre, but more importantly, I've transcended it, showing what more it can be, and in doing so, spread my readership to completely new groups who don't like and won't read typical fantasy. Agents and editors are screaming for more books like mine." From here, we're going to transition to something I've covered in detail before, but it's something that is certainly worth mentioning in a video titled "Why is Terry Goodkind So Hated?" And that is the probably greatest infraction on professionalism I've ever seen from an author, when he took to Facebook, posted a cover for an upcoming book of his, and said, "Shroud of Eternity is a great book. Can you just stop?" With a very bad cover. Laughably bad. So let's have some fun with it. Tell us what you think of this cover in my next post, the poll above, and we'll pick 10 random entries to win a signed copy of the hardcover. We'll pick the 10 winners March 1st. Everyone's welcome to play. Just cast your vote and post a comment. So maybe if you don't think about it for 2 seconds, that seems fine, but there was an artist who was paid to make that, who probably thought it was a really cool, amazing thing that a best-selling author was going to have them make their cover. And the artist found it and responded. "It was nice working with you, Terry. What you're doing is totally disrespectful, as if I didn't create those covers according to exactly what I was told to. In my entire career, I have never seen an author behaving like that. To which Terry responded, "Bastian, we have never worked together, never met, nor have I ever spoken with you. We've never exchanged a message before today, and I never told you what to create for this cover. All of that was between you and the publisher. I think there's been enough pot stirring for one day." So right away, just not his fault. The publisher screwed it up, and the fact that I'm publicly shaming an artist who, by the way, does amazing work. I'm going to link to his site down below. The guy is a genius, and I totally believe his claim that he made this according to publisher's notes, because wow, does he do amazing work. But he ends it by saying enough pot stirring today, basically saying this man calling him out for his incredible lack of professionalism is pot stirring, and not calling you out for being a total douche nozzle. And now we're going to talk about my final point for this video and what I find to be Terry Goodkind's worst infraction as a human being. And yes, it does involve my personal favorite fantasy author, Robert Jordan. I do not want you to think that is why I am doing this. I would be bringing this up if it was any fantasy author. It happens to be my personal favorite. Even if it was an author I did not like, trust me, I would be mentioning this. So the year is 2007. It is publicly known that Robert Jordan, the author of The Wheel of Time, is suffering from a terminal illness. He's in and out of the hospital and desperately trying to finish The Wheel of Time before, unfortunately, this illness takes him. He has to cancel going to an event because of needing to go to the hospital because he's freaking terminally ill. Terry Goodkind was also going to this event and did go and made comments mocking Robert Jordan for not showing up while he was there, and then felt the need to point out that he had recently been to the doctor and was told that he had the heart of a strong 16-year-old boy. Robert Jordan's health issues were heart-related. Can you imagine doing that? Mocking a terminally ill person who it's publicly known is terminally ill at this time, and then pointing out your own great health? But my God, man, how can you feel that is an acceptable way to behave as a human being, as someone with a platform? I have a tiny platform, and I already feel the need to watch what I say, be respectful, and be kind, because I know if I say something bad about a person, it has a heavy impact. People can go leave comments on their videos, on their channel, on their Facebook pages, because people on the internet do that. Please no, do not go send Terry Goodkind messages or tweet at him. Leave the guy alone. Let him wallow in who he is. But I do want to end this video by making one point. Terry Goodkind and I completely agree on one thing. He absolutely does not belong within the fantasy community. Anyway, guys, that's this video. I'd feel weird doing my normal like and subscribe Patreon sign off, so I'm just gonna say, hey, if you want to donate to some charities, they're linked in the description down below. I have the Robert Jordan Mayo Clinic, as well as one for veterans that I personally support. So go ahead and hit those if you want to put some good in the world after we just talked about so much negativity. Have a good one, y'all. Peace.